everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to talk about what makes rare books rare or important or valuable, and why would anyone spend so much money on a single codex. I am going to go at this historically and bring you into contemporary times in the end. And I will try to timestamp things if you are interested in only a certain category. But before I start, I want to mention that there are kind of two categories of people who deal with rare books. The first will be rare book libraries. These include libraries and museums like the Morgan Library in New York, or rare book collections that exist all throughout the world. And it would always depend on what kind of rare book library it is. Some are only collecting rare children's books, some collect rare manuscripts. The Folgers Library collects only Shakespeare because that's their specialty. So these museums and libraries are kind of more with the intent of educating and making them available to researchers and students of the future and present who are willing to look at these things on a more consistent level. But the second field is kind of like the rare book dealership. This is where you are dealing mostly with people who buy and sell books, and you might wonder how people came to acquire such things and such incredible treasures. And the answer is mostly that it either got handed down from generation to generation to some people, and then they decide to sell them at auctions. And some booksellers kind of do this thing where they flip books. They would get a book at a certain price if they knew its value, and the person selling it might not know its value, and then sell it for more. And then over time, they would keep making a profit until eventually they can afford to go to an auction and buy a very valuable rare book. Okay, so medieval manuscripts. Anything before the printing press or movable type is already just valuable for the fact that it's a manuscript. Each manuscript is a unique artifact because the script is different, the way the scribe worked is individualized because it was one of each. No matter how much monks or scribes of any kind were trying to be the same or uniform in any sense, it would still be different because everybody's handwriting is different. So medieval manuscripts are just valuable because they're manuscripts. They are historical and they have intrinsic value. As much as I would like to tell you that the medieval manuscript containing this picture of a nun collecting as a representation of what Tinder was like for women in the medieval period, or that this manuscript with kitty paws on it, it's clearly an educational piece demonstrating that cats never cared about your calligraphy. Unfortunately, that's not the reason why they're important. They're important because they are manuscripts, because they're unique, and because they have some historical value. I will actually link the realistic historical value of those two down below. So then we have the movable type in the printing press and things becoming more accessible. But there was this period of time right when that was invented, in the first 50 years or so, after the printing press was like fully going, where these books were printed with a printing press, but because they were kind of going off of what was before it, they were trying to replicate the look of a manuscript, and these books were called Incunables. Incunables are super expensive, and probably the most expensive thing out there is a Gutenberg Bible. Gutenberg's first printing was a Bible, and a full-on Gutenberg Bible is just the most pricey book out there. I think the last time one sold, it was something like $4 or $5 million. Some sources say that it might be worth $25 million at the moment because the sale happened in '78, I think. And just one single page from a Gutenberg Bible, if it was acquired by someone, it would be handed down and looked upon as like a great treasure. So moving past Gutenberg and the Incunables, we have the beginnings of rare books as like a kind of rare book field. These are things that are more available, and these are books that have their own value. So what makes these books important? First, it's its cultural relevance and importance. So for example, the first illustrated children's book officially is the Orbis Pictus, which is basically an encyclopedia, but it has illustrations which were done out of woodcut and then metal cut. The first few editions of that book are very valuable because of its cultural importance and what it meant to children everywhere. Some books are invaluable for their religious significance or for what it meant to that country, or just because it has have been inherited. Something like the Beowulf manuscript, which we have discussed in the past, and I'll put it up here. It's valuable because it's kind of the foundation of a lot of Anglo-Saxon tradition and English history, but also Danish and Swedish history. So it's suddenly very, very important. Second thing that makes a book valuable and rare is its scarcity. Why is it hard to find this particular book? Take, for instance, Shakespeare's folios. Shakespeare's works were printed in these folios, which are massive books containing his plays. Some of the folios have plays that the others don't. What you would be surprised to find is that the third folio is actually the most important. Why? Because it was printed around 1664, and all of the booksellers in London were kind of along the same strip where the Great Fire of London happened in 1666. So now, because of this historical event, the third folio, because it burned down with the shops, there are fewer copies of the third folio, and now it's the most expensive and valuable of the Shakespeare folios. Stuff like this is very important in the rare book field, to know why something is valuable, why it's important. You have to kind of be aware of not only book history, but also world events. So another one, for example, is Lewis Carroll's book of Alice in Wonderland. Lewis Carroll withdrew its first original printing because he didn't like the illustrations, but they had printed all of these books, and now they were saying, what are we going to do with them? And Carroll said, well, I don't want to sell them here where I live, so why don't you just send them over to America? And they did. And then the first English editions of Alice in Wonderland and the first American editions of Alice in Wonderland looked very different. And which one is more valuable? Which one is more scarce? It's very interesting to see these changes. And if you were to hold in your hand a rare book that belongs to Lewis Carroll from that first printing that got sent to America, you would also notice that the first title page was ripped out. Then you will see like the little stub of paper missing on the very first insert. But this is something you would have to know. So most recently, one of these copies was sold at an auction for $2 to $3 million, right? I'll link things down below. But that's what made that book very important and historically valuable. But this book is just valuable for English heritage, for children's literature, but also for having this physical object historical significance, and for being scarce, because there weren't that many copies made. Going with more recent examples, for instance, Jonathan Safran Foer printed this book called The Tree of Codes, which I've shared with you in like really fun and unique books video. I'll link it up here. When this book came out, it might have sold for like what a regular hardback goes for, $30 maybe, right? But because there are limited numbers of that copy of the book, the first edition, or even the proofs, because of its format, it's suddenly rare, and its price has gone up tenfold since, and it probably will continue to become more and more valuable over time, especially depending on how Jonathan Safran Foer does in his life and career. For instance, if he publishes one huge book and becomes so important, he wins the Nobel Prize, and he's forever known as this guy who did something super important, then that book would become even more valuable. So now it's kind of in flux. It could go up, it could go down, it all depends on what happens next in his career. The third most important thing is, what condition is it in? Is it in pristine condition? Is the book in its original binding? That's very important. Sometimes that would tell us a lot about a historical period. But let's just say if a library or a dealer had to choose between the same book in a pristine condition that might be easier to not only work with but preserve over a longer period of time, or a very battered copy, they would more likely go for this one. However, it's all depending on how expensive it is as well, and this one will probably be more expensive. And then the appeal for this one would be that it's cheaper. The fourth thing that's kind of important is also its subject. So for instance, some books with their content will be more important for certain museums or libraries than for others. If your library collects rare science books or rare science fiction books, they will be very interested to find, rare Hugo Award winners. And for them, they would have that eye formed to look for those specific pulpy sci-fi or for signatures from specific winners of the Clark Awards or Hugo Awards. The first James Tiptree Jr. printing, they would have that skill that someone, for example, who just works in a general rare book library might not. And the subject is very important because what a library or a dealer of one place might be willing to pay is very different from another. So if I'm collecting rare Peter Pan editions, for me that's very important. So I will know and recognize when something is worth a lot, and I would be willing to pay more for it because that's my collection. So it's very important for dealers to kind of be able to pick out who is more invested in collecting this and why. Being able to recognize the kind of human eagerness to acquire something. The fifth most important thing, and this is huge, is provenance. This means that this book or manuscript or codex or pamphlet belonged to someone. Who did it belong to, and why was it in their collection? If I have a book right now, but you find out that my great-grandfather was Charles Darwin and he inherited from his great-grandfather Shakespeare, then clearly that book is incredibly valuable because it belonged to really important people. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes these books would also have incredible binders tickets inside, or crests, or coat of arms, or things that would just highlight the importance of that family, that clan, that community. Sometimes it would be royalty. So it's very important to look at where this book comes from and who owned it and why. Provenance is super important. And I'm going to tie this in with the next point, which is annotations. Now, as I said before, it is ideal if a book is in pristine condition and there are no annotations. But sometimes the annotations can make a book more rare than it being in pristine conditions. So, for example, in a library that I worked in, we collected a lot of Virginia Woolf's things and in books that she had in her collection. And it was just like, here are Virginia Woolf's shelves, and we have them, and these were her books. Now imagine going through a copy of Hamlet and seeing all of Virginia Woolf's annotations in the margins. Suddenly, that flimsy copy of Hamlet that might have been a paperback and worthless has now become a rare work of art because it includes the marginalia of a very important person, and maybe she even put notes about some of her future writings in it. That book is now very, very important. Sometimes the person who owned it is more important and valuable historically than the book would have been or its original author. And this doesn't necessarily go for like manuscripts or super rare important books, right? Like even if you had a bestseller paperback from the Victorian period and you have thousands of these, but now I have a copy that has been annotated by Charles Dickens himself, suddenly that copy is extremely valuable. As I mentioned, it really does matter who bought these books and why. For example, some libraries that are of rare books, they have a teaching collection. So for them, it would be important to acquire a specific book because it has something of value for teaching purposes. Maybe it's a medieval Islamic binding or a French binding or blind tool binding, or they want to show the students what binders tickets looked like in the book, or they want to show them how a map or an atlas would look like from Abraham Ortelius's first atlas. And over time, both rare book librarians and book dealers become more astute to book history, and they have this knowledge of what was important and why. So they're always looking for these things. This is kind of like a book hunter's passion, right? It's something you just have in you over time because you've done it for so long. So for example, if you saw a book and you knew that Horace Walpole was very important because he was part of the arts and crafts movement in Victorian England, and the Strawberry Hill Press writing is on the cover of that book, you know that that's a valuable book. If you know that John Baskerville was very important because he modernized type and changed things in the world of arts and crafts, again, you know that that's a valuable book. Same with Sir William Morris and so many other people in the book history field. But these are just things that you learn along the way. And the more you learn about these things, the more you see them. So I was once, for example, at a flea market in Oxford, and they were just selling things that they had in their attics, random people didn't know what they had. And I found this one book for £2 British, and it was a third edition of Plutarch's Lives, translated by Sir Thomas North. Now, I had just studied Shakespeare and learned that the first edition of Plutarch's Lives, translated by Thomas North, would have been read by Shakespeare, and that's why he adapted certain facts from that book into his histories. So now seeing this third edition from 1777, I immediately wanted to have a copy, and I thought, oh man, this is going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars and he's probably gonna shoo me away. And the person was just like, yeah, £2, take it, I don't care. And it's not something that everyone knows, so you have to kind of learn as much as you can about history and books. And when you go to flea markets, keep an eye out for these things, because some people just don't know what they have. So now let's move into contemporary times. How can we know if something's valuable? My recommendation would be to keep an ear out for when you think a book seems to have some cultural relevance. So for example, in Canada, I would say off the top of my head, the first thing I kind of noticed was that Station 11 was kind of important. So I noticed that it did really well, it won awards. So if you find a first edition of Station 11, when you look that up on AbeBooks, you might notice that its price has gone significantly up. In the last 21 years, a big book that came out was Infinite Jest, right? So I kept my eyes out for a while. One of the things that makes Infinite Jest valuable, especially in its first edition, is that there is a misspelling of Woolman's name. When I got this from New York, from the Strand, this book was under $100 US. And now, after a while, this book has gone up in price significantly because people are becoming more aware of its cultural significance or its importance in literature. And the first edition is suddenly a lot more important. Another book that comes to mind is Wolf Hall. When I think about this, I think, okay, this is an author who has been revered in many circles. She's admired. Her book has done really well, won awards. So if you look up some of the first editions or very special copies of her book, or maybe she signed some of them, keep an eye out for those. And if you look on AbeBooks again, just to kind of clarify, you can see that some of these really are truly valuable. And you want to read the descriptions in each one of these, because some people don't know how to look for the important parts. So you want to look for first edition, first printing, signed books, hardcover. Harry Potter is the biggest probably in contemporary times. If you can find first editions from the UK of all 7 Harry Potter books, and especially if any of them are signed, you are sitting on a treasure, because they are worth a lot. I'm going to link down below some resources. And there are ways to educate yourself about this. AbeBooks and rare book dealers have on their websites a lot of things that they are in demand for, or what they are telling you to hint, look out for. It's kind of important to have like this awareness about you of cultural significance or importance. So for example, whether you like it or not, one of the people that has done pretty darn well has been Rupi Kaur. And her Instagram poetry being turned into an actual book was kind of a one-off. It was a big success, and it was one of the first of its kind. If we're looking at cultural importance of digital text being turned into physical codex and being widely read, she sold 2.5 million copies in 25 languages and stayed at the tops of the New York Times best-selling list for 77 weeks. That's going to be important. So if you look for one of her rare books, you'll find that it's actually very expensive right now. Even though you might have seen many and many of her copies running around, the first editions of that and the first printings, and if they are inscribed by her or signed by her, will be very important. Because people have bought and read and talked about her book so much, it has made her relevant. And in recent publications, she might have even have been listed as one of the most important poets of this generation. Now, you don't have to agree or disagree, but if you're kind of a book hunter, you want to keep an eye out for these kind of cultural things and big waves of important. Like even the Twilight books and their first printing, first editions signed by Stephanie Meyer will be very valuable. I think my newest acquisition that I kind of had a feeling it was going to do well was Lincoln in the Bardo. I saw George Saunders on Colbert and I thought, okay, this guy is clearly a big deal because of the short stories thing, and he's considered the king of short stories. So now he just drops his first novel. Obviously a big deal. It's about Abraham Lincoln, obviously a big deal. So I went and pre-ordered the first edition because that's what a pre-order is, really. And it just happened to be from the Penguin store, which had signed copies. Now, I'm sitting on this copy right now, and it may be not that expensive, right? But now it all depends on what George Saunders does. Will he become immortalized? Will he be very valuable to our cultural heritage? Or will he be a one-off? There's a chance that this book might not be that valuable in the future. There's a chance that there are many copies of his first printing of his first novel. There are chances that many people have signed copies of his books. But if, for instance, he were to die, then suddenly all of these books do become valuable because he can no longer continue to sign them. So it's the same for Margaret Atwood or people who are currently valuable but alive. They're not as rare yet just because they can continue to produce. And now, kind of given the demand and the expectations of people due to pre-orders, people can kind of tell whether that book will do well or not. So just kind of be informed, educate yourself about book history, keep an eye out for important presses in history, for limited editions. Like if something only had 25 copies in its first printing, that's a rare book, you know, and everyone has their own little niche thing, you know. Some people collect early Canadian literature, some people collect early LGBT pamphlets. It all depends on what's important to you and your collector's bubble, and you have to be kind of knowledgeable and know the worth that they have, because you yourself might be able to flip it for the future and make a profit, or you might be able to identify if someone is selling it to you for a lot less than it deserves, in which case you want to get on that. So that's kind of my input on this. I'm obviously not a rare book dealer, but I love studying rare books and I have a passion for book hunting. So I would also recommend the documentary The Booksellers, which I'll link it down below. It's wonderful and it kind of drops you into the world of what it's like to be a rare book dealer. So on that note, thank you very much for watching and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!